Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on, well, a ghost. A figure whose name is known globally, whose writing sits on shelves in pretty much every major library, and yet he's shrouded in more mystery than almost any other foundational philosopher. We're talking about Laozi.
It's a spectacular challenge, because here we have a phenomenon, not just a person.
Exactly, a phenomenon.
His book, the Tao Te Ching, is one of the most translated and influential texts in human history. It fundamentally shaped religion, ethics, politics, all across East Asia.
And yet the closer you look at the man himself,
The more he just sort of dissolves into legend. We aren't even sure if Laozi refers to one single person, or if he's, an invented author for a compilation that took centuries to write.
Right. And our stack of sources today is immense. We're really pulling back the curtain on this profound historical and philosophical riddle. So for you, the learner, we're going to try and cut through all that myth to find the essential wisdom.
We're diving into the pretty vicious debates around his identity, the actual textual evolution of the Tao Te Ching.
And its core concepts, which can be so contradictory, like the Tao and Wu Wei. And then there's this astonishing afterlife his ideas have had.
Oh, absolutely. From being enshrined as a divine ancestor by emperors all the way to being claimed as, the intellectual father of modern libertarianism and anarchism.
So our mission today is to navigate that really fluid line between verifiable historical fact and, the thick layer of legendary invention that's been laid down over 2 millennia.
And the big question we're pursuing is this. How can a philosopher who might not have even existed still fundamentally shape religion, politics, and culture for thousands of years?
And how can he remain so profoundly relevant to our modern questions about power and progress?
We're focusing on what this legacy means for understanding our relationship with nature, with power, and with intentional action today.
Okay, so let's get into it. Let's unpack this old master, starting with the very first problem, his name.
It's so vital to begin there. You have to recognize that the name Laozi isn't a personal identifier, not in the way we think of one today.
Right, it's not like John Smith.
Not at all. It's an abstraction, really, an honorific title. The characters translate directly to old master or venerable teacher.
And that structure immediately gives him this incredible authority. We see the same thing with other major figures from that era.
Kongzi.
Or Confucius, as we know him, and Zhuangzi. This kind of naming suggests that even if he wasn't a single person, he was immediately positioned by later generations as this foundational thinker, someone whose wisdom demanded immediate reverence.
Absolutely. The name itself is a declaration of status, but despite it being an honorific, traditional accounts do try to give him a personal name.
And the most famous one is?
Liar. That's L-N-A-R.
And the sources note that the surname Lai is common, but it also has another meaning, right? It means plum or plum tree as a noun.
It does. And this is exactly where the historical details start to get twisted into the legendary almost instantly.
There we go.
A very popular story cropped up that Laozi's mother gave birth to him while she was leaning against a plum tree. It creates this immediate poetic link between the philosopher's name and a natural, venerable symbol.
It adds a layer of destiny. But Lauer isn't the only name he's known by.
Not by a long shot. He's also frequently identified as Lao Dan, Lumdan. And this name is arguably more historically crucial.
Why is that?
Because it appears in the earliest and most authoritative sources we have, Sima Qian's Shiji, the records of the grand historian.
And even in the other major Taoist text, the Zhuangzi.
Exactly. And the character Dan holds this huge symbolic weight. It's often translated as long ear or the long-eared one.
And in ancient Chinese culture, long earlobes were a big deal.
A very big deal. They were potent symbols of profound wisdom, long life, and high spiritual attainment. So to call him Lao Dan is to immediately label him a sage of ancient, almost mythical wisdom.
So if we trace the names, we're moving from something potentially practical, Li or to something deeply symbolic and venerable, Lao Dan. But there's another formal name, too, that adds even more dignity to the figure.
Yes, his courtesy name. This would be used in formal or more respectful situations. It's recorded as Boyang. Boyang.
And looking at the characters here adds another level of aristocratic authority. The character Bo.
Yeah. Right. Bo historically meant the eldest son born to the primary wife, or sometimes it was an aristocratic title, something like a count. It implies rulership or seniority.
And Yang, of course, is the masculine, solar, positive life force in Taoist cosmology, the yang in yin and yang.
Correct. So his courtesy name layers dignity, lineage, and cosmic energy onto this figure.
This sheer number of respectful names, Layer, Lao Dan, Boyang, and then the ultimate honorific Laozi, is really the first clearest sign that we're dealing with a composite construction built over time.
That's it. We're not looking at a straightforward historical biography of one man. The name itself is fluid because the identity underneath it is fluid.
Okay, here's where the tension really ratchets up. We rely so heavily on Sima Qian's records of the grand historian from the 1st century BC for almost everything about early Chinese figures. But what's so fascinating is that Sima Qian, the grand historian himself, couldn't land on a single version for Laozi.
He couldn't. He presented multiple distinct accounts and then openly expressed his own skepticism, saying, I can't choose between them.
Which is a profound act of historical transparency, really.
It is. Sima Qian is essentially admitting that even just 300 years or so after Laozi supposedly lived, the facts were already impossible to pin down. So he gives us 3 distinct possibilities, which modern scholars use to analyze how the myth was layered over time.
Let's break down the first and probably the most enduring account, the archivist.
This is the narrative that really dominates the popular imagination. It places Laozi as a contemporary of Kongzi Confucius, so that situates him historically in the tumultuous 6th or 5th century BC during the spring and autumn period.
And in this version, he wasn't a wandering sage.
No, not at all. He was said to be born in the southern state of Chu, and crucially, he held a powerful bureaucratic role, the keeper of the archives for the royal zoo court.
That position keeper of the archives, that's critical. It instantly elevates him beyond just some local philosopher.
Absolutely. It implies he was embedded right in the center of political and intellectual power. This would have granted him broad access to the Yellow Emperor's classic works, the entire repository of zoo history.
It makes him the ultimate authority on traditional knowledge and history.
Exactly. This account firmly positions him as a high-ranking intellectual.
And this is the version that includes that famous, maybe legendary, meeting with Confucius.
Yeah.
That must have been politically significant for both philosophical schools.
Incredibly significant. Though, ironically, the most detailed and well-known retelling of that meeting is actually in the Zhuangzi, the other great Taoist text.
And how does that meeting go?
Well, Confucius is often portrayed as being a bit overwhelmed or even chastised by Laozi for his rigid focus on rituals and conventional morality. Laozi's advice to him is often about shedding his aristocratic arrogance and seeking the stillness of the natural way.
So whether it's historical or not, the story immediately establishes the superiority of Taoist spontaneity over Confucian formalism, at least in the eyes of Taoists.
Precisely.
Okay, so that's the historical scholarly version, the knowledgeable bureaucrat. What about the second possibility Sima Qian gave us?
Account 2 completely swaps out the protagonist. Here, Laozi is identified as a different contemporary named Laozi.
Laozi, and he's framed differently.
Totally differently. This Laozi is celebrated as one of the 24 filial exemplars, which gives him a moral pedigree rather than political one. He also wrote a book, but Sima Qian says it was in 15 parts, which immediately distinguishes it from the 2-part Tao Te Ching.
And this story has a very specific anecdote about military ethics that changes his whole character.
It does. It tells the story of Zong the warrior who achieved a major military victory, but, well, she left the fallen enemy soldiers unburied to be eaten by vultures.
Grim.
Very. And Laozi, traveling through, encounters Zong and reveals himself to be his long-lost father. And the core teaching here is profoundly Taoist, that Zong must treat a defeated enemy with respect. Disrespect to the dead, Laozi warns, will just lead to cycles of revenge and unending war.
And the sources say Zong was convinced. He buried the enemy dead, held a shared funeral, and it led to a lasting peace.
Right. So this narrative links Laozi to foundational teachings on military restraint and compassion. It's a completely different focus from the archivist who was all about historical records. It really shows the sage was already a kind of blank slate onto which these powerful moral lessons could be projected.
Now for account 3, the one most directly linked to how we think the Tao Te Ching came to be.
This one is pure poetry.
It really is.
It identifies him as the court astrologer Lao Dan, a figure who lived much later, maybe during the 4th century BC. This account dramatically shifts the timeline. It suggests the foundational text is later than the traditional Confucius timeline.
And in this version, Lao Dan grows weary of the moral decay and political turmoil of the collapsing Zhou kingdom.
He does, and at the advanced age of 80, he decides to abandon civilization entirely and venture west toward the unsettled frontier.
The journey to the edge of the known world, leaving society for a hermitage.
Precisely. And at the westernmost pass of the kingdom, he was recognized by the guard, a man named Yingxi. The sentry, knowing this man was a great sage, begged the old master to record his wisdom for posterity before he would let him pass and disappear.
And that text, supposedly written in a single sitting, basically is an exit visa.
Was the Tao Te Ching.
And the legend finishes with that powerful note that Yingxi was so moved by the work, he either became a disciple and left with Laozi, or just watched the old master vanish into the West, never to be seen again.
That Western journey, that disappearance into the unknown, became the most powerful image of all. It even evolved into this highly influential idea that the old master kept going all the way to India.
Where he taught Siddhartha Gautama.
Or that he was the Buddha himself in an earlier incarnation. This final legend tries to unify the intellectual traditions of China and India, which just shows the staggering stature Laozi had attained.
If we just pause on that for a second, the desire to fuse Laozi and the Buddha, that tells you so much, not just about the spiritual power of Laozi's legend, but maybe about a cultural anxiety over foreign influence.
How so?
Well, by making the Buddha a disciple of a Chinese master, the Chinese philosophical tradition retains its perceived seniority. It's a profound act of cultural self-assertion.
And that profound cultural self-assertion runs directly into the cold, hard logic of modern textual criticism. With 3 conflicting biographies, a figure who writes a book in 15 parts, a timeline that shifts over centuries, modern scholars had immense difficulty establishing a historical Laozi.
This skepticism led to a pretty strong consensus by the mid-20th century, right?
A very strong consensus that the historicity of a single person named Laozi is highly doubtful. The scholarly view now generally regards the Tao Te Ching as a compilation of Taoist sayings by many hands.
With the old master being invented later to consolidate these sayings and give the tradition an authority figure.
Exactly. And this is reinforced by the style of the book itself. The Tao Te Ching is unique among early Chinese philosophical works because it conspicuously lacks a central master figure.
Right. You don't read the master said like you do in the Analects or even in the Zhuangzi.
The text just speaks for itself, which suggests that maybe there was no single master speaking.
And this scholarly doubt moved from just theoretical skepticism to near certainty, thanks to some monumental archaeological discoveries in the late 20th century. They provided actual textual evidence of the text evolving over time.
This is where the archaeology just fundamentally shatters the traditional story of the single-session masterpiece. We have to look first at the Gordian shoe slips.
So what exactly did the Gordian shoe slips reveal, and why were they so revolutionary?
Well, they were discovered in a tomb in Hubei, and they date to the late 4th century BC, so they predate the traditional timeline for a singular author. They are the oldest manuscript fragments containing text we can recognize from the Tao Te Ching, about a third of the final received text.
But the truly crucial finding wasn't just the age, it was the context of the passages on those bamboo slips.
Exactly. These passages were not collected neatly together. They were interspersed, mixed in with texts that were not carried into the later official Tao Te Ching.
So what does that prove?
It's decisive evidence that in the late 4th century BC, the core verses of what would become the Tao Te Ching were still circulating as independent sayings. They were being edited, compiled, and actively revised within this wider body of Taoist wisdom. It was a fluid body of knowledge, proving the compilation was still in progress.
So the whole idea of an 80-year-old man sitting down and writing the whole thing in one go for Yingxi at the gate becomes, well, highly unlikely.
Very unlikely. The text seems to have existed before the man did. And then we have the Mawangdui manuscripts, which push the evidence even further.
These were the early complete versions, correct?
Yes. The Mawangdui manuscripts are essential because they represent the oldest complete versions of the Tao Te Ching ever discovered. They were sealed in a tomb in Hunan in 168 BC.
And they show the final stage of the text's evolution.
They do. And what's fascinating is that these manuscripts divide the text differently than the version we have now. The Tise, or virtue section, comes before the Tao, the Wei section.
The order is reversed, so it's the Tao Ching instead of the Tao Te Ching.
Right. And while they are complete, they still predate the canonical received text by centuries, and they reveal slight variations in wording, content arrangement, and even how the chapters are divided.
It just shows that the structure was built up over time by anonymous editors and contributors. An evolutionary creation, not an instantaneous one.
That's it. The tension here is immense. You have this beautiful, powerful narrative of the wise old master, Lia who wrote a perfect, unified book before vanishing. But then you have the archaeology of bamboo and silk slips showing the text was a dynamic, collaborative, and evolving tradition over at least 2 centuries.
So what's clear is that the text itself has become the ultimate authority, regardless of whether the man ever existed.
Right.
Which brings us to the actual content. Let's shift our focus entirely from the author debate to the work itself. The Tao Te Ching is revered not just for its wisdom, but for its utterly distinctive literary form.
The literary style is inseparable from the philosophy it imparts. It's deliberately elusive. It doesn't teach through, linear instruction or argument.
No, it's not a textbook.
Not at all. It uses a highly specialized method that relies on paradox, evocative analogy, repetition, symmetry, rhyme, rhythm. It's designed to be absorbed intuitively, not logically.
It's designed to make you think sideways, to break you out of conventional binary thought patterns.
And that's the core Taoist critique. Taoism fundamentally holds that language and conventional wisdom are inherently biased and artificial. The human distinctions we insist on, good versus bad, beautiful versus ugly, full versus empty, these are constructs that lead directly to struggle and suffering.
So if language is the problem, the solution is using language to undermine itself. How does the text do that? Can you give us some specific examples of those paradoxes?
The paradoxes are absolutely key to that subversion. They challenge your ignorant assumptions. For example, the text states, the softest thing in the world overcomes the hardest thing in the world.
Water eroding stone.
Exactly. It's a literal statement about that, but it's a philosophical instruction about yielding over forcing. Or consider the spatial paradoxes, like the great square has no corners, or the great image has no shape.
Those statements are intentionally baffling to the logical mind. I mean, a square has corners, by definition.
It does, to the logical mind. But the philosopher is instructing you that the most complete, the most perfect square, the square that is everywhere, must, by definition, transcend the limiting concept of corners. By forcing you, the reader, to embrace a logical absurdity, the text tries to get around those ingrained linguistic biases.
This literary strategy also gives the text its famed air of timelessness.
That's the other crucial characteristic. Unlike the Analects or many philosophical works from that era, the Tao Te Ching almost entirely avoids referencing specific historical people, events, or battles.
Right, there are no political hot takes on specific dukes or historical policies.
None. By avoiding those historical markers, the text achieves a universal applicability that transcends dynastic concerns. It means that whether you're reading it in the 4th century BC or in the 21st century AD, the core concepts feel accessible and direct. It's not constrained by its historical context.
Okay, let's move to the ultimate yet most elusive concept. The Tao itself. We often just translate it as the way. For the listener, what is the Tao in the context of this text beyond that literal definition?
The Tao is described as the source, the pattern, and the ideal of all existence. It's the underlying, spontaneous, natural order that governs the universe. It's simultaneously the origin of all things and the way that all things follow.
The text uses some profound imagery to describe it.
It does. It's unseen, yet immensely powerful. It's supremely humble, yet at the same time, it's the root of all things.
The humility aspect is often tied to the imagery of water, isn't it?
Absolutely. Water is the perfect Taoist metaphor. Chapter 8 of the text describes how the highest good is like water because water benefits all things and doesn't strive. It's content to dwell in low places that people disdain.
And yet water is unstoppable.
Unstoppable. It adapts to any vessel, and over time, it carves canyons. This is the power of the Tao. Passive strength, not aggressive force.
It sounds a bit like a deity or some transcendent force. Is the Tao meant to be worshipped?
Crucially, no. The sources really emphasize that the Tao is unseen, but it is not transcendent.
Okay, what's the difference?
It's immanent. It's right here, woven into the fabric of the universe. It's in the flow of the river, in the growth of the trees, in the silence of the valley. It's a natural pattern, which is why Taoism focuses on observation and yielding rather than striving towards some distant heavenly goal, like in some Western philosophies or theistic religions.
This brings us to the human condition. If the Tao is a perfect natural order, where do people fit in, and why do we always seem to mess it up?
Well, we possess desires and free will, which allows us to act unnaturally. Our ambition, our insistence on rigid moral and political distinctions, our striving for wealth or fame, these are human-made constructs that upset the natural balance of the Tao.
So the core intention of the Tao Te Ching isn't to introduce a new ethical code.
Not at all. It's to lead the student to a return, a kind of philosophical and spiritual de-learning back to their original natural state in spontaneous harmony with the way.
And this process of returning is achieved primarily through the practice of Wu Wei. Ah, Wu Wei. Probably the most famous and most misleadingly translated concept in the text. Literally, Wu Wei means non-action or not acting. But if we took that literally, we'd all just be sitting in a cave starving.
Exactly. We have to move beyond that literal translation. Wu Wei describes the quality of the action, not the absence of movement. It's deeply multifaceted. It can mean not forcing, not acting in a theatrical or self-conscious sense.
Or acting spontaneously.
Or my favorite, flowing with the moment.
So it's not about inaction, but non-coercive action. Can we use a modern analogy to ground this a bit?
Sure. Think of the concept of flow state in high-performance sports or creative work. When a jazz musician improvises perfectly or an athlete performs flawlessly, they aren't consciously straining or calculating every single move.
They're in the zone.
They are in the zone. They're acting without self-consciousness, allowing their training in the moment to guide them. That spontaneous, effortless integration with the task at hand. That's a form of Wu Wei. It's like riding a wave rather than trying to wrestle it to the shore.
And this requires recognizing that all these human-imposed value distinctions, our desperate need to label and control things, are just artificial constructs that lead to effort and strain.
Yes. The practice of Wu Wei demands simplicity and humility, in contrast to ambitious, selfish striving. It's the direct connection to ziran, which is spontaneity or harmony with the Tao. It's about being like the uncarved, block, undifferentiated potential that remains whole.
This concept immediately gained profound political relevance. How does Wu Wei translate into statecraft?
On political level, it translates into radical governmental restraint. The ideal ruler practices non-interference. Wu Wei in politics means avoiding war, harsh laws, excessive bureaucracy, and critically heavy taxes.
So the text suggests that the perfect ruler is the one that people barely even know exists.
Exactly, because they aren't constantly interfering or trying to mold society. The idea is that minimizing the role of government allows individuals and society to develop spontaneously, which naturally achieves harmony.
Chapter 57 is often cited here.
I take no action, and the people are transformed by themselves. I love tranquility, and the people become righteous by themselves. I engage in no activity, and the people prosper by themselves.
However, this interpretation runs into a really serious philosophical ambiguity. There are statements in the Tao Te Ching that seem to encourage rulers to keep their people in ignorance or simple-minded, which, sounds highly authoritarian.
This is the crucial point of scholarly debate. Some insist that these controversial lines are indeed pragmatic, maybe somewhat cynical, political advice meant to stabilize a chaotic state.
But if the text is truly about returning to the Tao, that simplicity can't just be enforced ignorance.
It can't be. If the goal is spiritual return, then the simplicity must be internal. And this is where those highly technical, metaphysical terms come in, which really challenge a simple political reading. You mentioned the valley spirit, Jingshen, and the soul, Po.
Right.
Yeah.
What do those terms imply?
These terms elevate the discussion immediately out of political theory and into cosmology. Jingshen, the valley spirit, is an early Taoist term, often associated with the primordial feminine, receptive energy, the eternal nurturing void that gives birth to the universe. It represents the deepest, most mysterious source of vitality.
So it's the generative force that is receptive, like a valley collecting water.
Precisely. And Po refers to the corporeal soul or the animal, instinctive aspect of the self, which is often contrasted with the more ethereal or spiritual soul, the Hun.
So when the text mentions these concepts, it's grounding the philosophy in the internal cultivation of this primordial energy, not just social engineering.
Exactly. The argument is that the text is advocating for cultivating a spiritual state of simple-mindedness, a state free from the corrupting desires and artificial complexities that our animal self, our Pa, creates, not enforcing political stupidity.
It shifts the goal from controlling the masses to achieving internal freedom.
And that internal quiet is what Alan Chan connects to the modern world, especially regarding technology and manufactured desire. He suggests that our constant striving, our technological progress, it often brings about this false sense of superiority and leads us further from our natural state, from the Tao.
And the answer isn't a Luddite rejection of the material world.
No, not at all. Instead, the answer is cultivating the calm state of Wu Wei, free from the consuming desires that technology or any complex artificial system is constantly creating.
So Wu Wei is ultimately about choosing quiet presence over noisy ambition.
Mm.
That's a powerful idea for a world just saturated by information. It's truly remarkable that a text compiled anonymously and attributed to a possibly fictional old master could have such wide-ranging influence. We've established the text's power. Now let's look at the astonishing afterlife of the man, the legend Laozi.
The transformation from skeptical archivist to divine figure really began during the Han Dynasty. As Taoism organized itself into a formal, structured religion rather than just a philosophical school, they needed a divine source of revelation.
And Laozi filled that gap perfectly.
He did. He went from a philosophical ancestor to a full-fledged divine ancestor, a figure whose wisdom was not merely earned, but revealed. And this belief in revelation from the divine Laozi led directly to the formation of the Way of the Celestial Masters, the very first organized religious Taoist sect.
In later tradition, he became nothing less than a personification of the Tao itself.
The source incarnate. He was said to have undergone numerous transformations and taken on various guises across history to initiate the faithful.
And this deification demanded increasingly spectacular origin myths. The birth story is one of the most memorable in all of Chinese religion.
The myth of his virgin birth is key to his divine status. It describes him being conceived when his mother gazed upon a falling star, a clear sign of cosmic intervention. But the famous fantastic detail is the gestation period.
He supposedly remained in her womb for 62 years.
62 years. He was born ancient.
He was. When he was finally born, he emerged as a grown man with a full gray beard and those long earlobes we mentioned, already possessing the wisdom of age. This established him as Laozi, the old master, from the moment of his birth under the plum tree. These myths were essential for cementing his religious authority, and this political dimension just exploded during the Tang dynasty. Why did the Tang emperors elevate Laozi's status so significantly?
It was a monumental act of political legitimization. The Tang imperial family, the powerful Longxi lineage, claimed descent from Laozi. They capitalized on his traditional personal name, Lair.
So the ruling family wasn't just sanctioned by the Tao, they were literally related to its physical manifestation.
Exactly. That is an incredible political maneuver. It tied their mandate to heaven, to the wisdom and lineage of the ultimate old master. It provided an unassailable foundation for their authority.
And it guaranteed him unprecedented veneration.
Oh, the state invested immense capital in his legend. This manifested in escalating imperial titles. In 666, Emperor Gaozong named Laozi the supremely mysterious and primordial emperor. The titles just kept getting grander.
In 743, Emperor Xuanzong declared him the sage ancestor of the dynasty and gave him the posthumous title of mysterious and primordial emperor. This wasn't just religious patronage, it was dynastic policy.
It absolutely was. They also elevated Laozi's parents to the ranks of innately supreme emperor and innate empress. By 754, his official title had ballooned to the utterly magnificent great sage ancestor and mysterious and primordial heavenly emperor and great sovereign of the golden palace of the high and supreme great way. Yeah, it's perhaps the ultimate demonstration of how a philosopher's legend can be adapted and repurposed by the ruling class to solidify their own power.
And this established the clear ideal of the master-student relationship in Taoist thought, focusing on Laozi as the model of perfection.
Yes. The 7th century Sandong Zunang, the pearly bag of the three caverns, codified this. It used Laozi as the perfect master in Ningxi, the humble gate sentry who begged him to write down his wisdom as the ultimate ideal student. It emphasizes the notion that profound truth is revealed not in the clamor of the court, but at the periphery, to the pure of heart.
The journey to the West, which began as a philosophical retreat, morphed into a divine mission. But what truly speaks to the universal, adaptable nature of his wisdom is his influence thousands of miles away, in a completely different spiritual and linguistic tradition.
This is one of the most compelling cross-cultural links. We find Laozi woven into the Siddhar tradition of Tamil Nadu in South India. In this tradition, the greatly revered sitter Brigar, one of the 18 esteemed sitters of yore, is believed to be none other than Laozi himself, having traveled from China.
A Chinese philosopher traveling to South India and integrating into their highly esoteric spiritual lineage. How is this identity handled in the Tamil tradition?
Well, Bogar is even sometimes noted by the caste designation Sanata Karkuavar, or Chinese potter, confirming his perceived foreign origin. His principal book of poetry, the Bogar 7000, actually contains autobiographical sections that describe his travels to China and back to India.
And what specifically did he carry from the Taoist tradition into the siddhar practices?
The philosophical focus he brought was highly esoteric, aligning with specific Taoist internal alchemy practices. Bogar's work deals heavily with kaya kalpa methods for achieving immortality or radical longevity, and the sublimation of sexual energies for self-realization.
So it blends the Taoist concept of vital energy cultivation, qi, with the unique demands of the siddhar system.
Exactly. Bogar's shrine, his Jiva Samadhi, is found at the Tandayuthapani temple, making him a cornerstone of this regional religious framework. It confirms how profoundly the legend of the Old Master's journey was adapted and internalized into a completely foreign context, fulfilling that early legend that he went west to teach.
Now, we jump ahead nearly 2 millennia, across continents and political systems, where Laozi's teachings on limited government and non-intervention find fertile ground in contemporary political philosophy.
The anti-authoritarian streak inherent in Wu Wei has resonated deeply with thinkers looking for alternatives to centralized state power. Historically, this was evident in China, where potential officials would use the authority of Laozi and Zhuangzi to justify denying service to corrupted rulers.
They advocated for radical humility and restraint in leadership.
Right.
So let's start with the contemporary libertarian claim, which is very explicit in our sources. The right libertarian economist Murray Rothbard actually called Laozi the first libertarian.
He did. Rothbard drew a clear parallel between Laozi's ideas on minimizing government and Friedrich Hayek's theory of spontaneous order, the idea that harmony emerges organically in a complex system without central planning or coercion.
Can we point to a specific verse or concept in the Tao Te Ching that these libertarian thinkers cite to support this claim?
A classic citation is often Chapter 57, which speaks directly to the ill effects of interference. The more restrictions and prohibitions there are in the world, the poorer the people become. The more sharp weapons the people have, the more turmoil the country is in.
That's a direct critique of regulation and state force.
Precisely. James A. Dorn argued that Laozi, much like 18th century classical liberals, sought social and economic harmony by minimizing government interference. David Boaz of the Cato Institute, who published Laozi passages in the Libertarian Reader, highlighted that Laozi advocated for rulers to do nothing, because without law or compulsion, men would dwell in harmony.
The core appeal is the inherent trust in the natural order, the Tao or ziran, over the coerced order of state control. It's important to note, however, that it's not just the right libertarian space that claims him. Anarchists who distrust all concentrated authority have also found immense wisdom in the old master.
Absolutely. The anarcho-syndicalist Rudolf Rocker praised Laozi's gentle wisdom and specifically noted his deep understanding of the opposition between coercive political power and the spontaneous, natural cultural activities of the people and the community.
Laozi's emphasis on decentralized simplicity fits perfectly within the anarchist rejection of hierarchical control.
It does. And Peter Kropotkin, another foundational anarchist thinker, similarly noted that Laozi was among the earliest historical proponents of essential anarchist concepts, suggesting the philosophy predated its Western articulation by millennia.
Ursula K. Le Guin, in her famous translation, she connects the dots perfectly.
She does. She highlights the anti-authoritarian spirit, noting that Laozi does not see political power as magic. Instead, rightful power is earned by aligning with the way, and wrongful power is inherently usurped and corrupted by striving.
She specifically concludes that Laozi sees the ultimate self-sacrifice or sacrifice of others as a corruption of power, stating that the old master teaches restraint, not domination. And her conclusion:
no wonder anarchists and Taoists make good friends.
This shared value of self-mastery and community spontaneity over external coercive authority unites the anti-authoritarian left and right.
However, in maintaining our impartial analysis, we have to note the critical counterpoint. Not all scholars agree that Taoism is the original source for these anti-statist ideas, which is a fascinating complication.
Roderick Long, for instance, challenges the narrative of Taoist originality.
Long argues that while libertarian themes are profoundly present in Taoist thought, these ideas might actually have been borrowed from earlier non-status Confucian or even legalist writers who are also deeply concerned with the proper limits and function of government.
It suggests a more complex intellectual history, where ideas were exchanged and refined across competing schools before coalescing into the Tao Te Ching.
Exactly. It reminds us that intellectual history is a constantly flowing river, not a simple linear progression from a single spring.
This has been a profound journey. We started with the search for a single historical archivist named Li and ended up with a deified ancestor, a Tamil Siddhar, and the spiritual guide for anti-authoritarian political movements globally.
The core takeaways are really defined by radical transformation and tension. We tracked the shift from the potentially historical archivist to the philosophical legend of Lao Dan, whose disappearance is key to his myth.
We explored the textual evidence of the anonymous Tao Te Ching, the Godian, and Mawang Dui slips, which reveal the text to be a slow compilation rather than an instantaneous masterpiece.
And we defined the core concepts. The Tao as the immanent, spontaneous way, and Wu Wei as spontaneous, non-coercive action, which demands internal simplicity rather than political oppression.
The true power of Laozi is that whether he existed as a single person in the 6th century BC or not is now, well, it's entirely irrelevant. His work forces you, the learner, to question the most foundational assumptions of society: conventional wisdom, the reliability of language, and the fundamental nature of political power.
The text has become the master.
It's a remarkable legacy built on the power of absence, the utility of the empty space in the cup, the usefulness of the uncarved lock, the strength of the invisible way.
And that leads us back to the most poignant part of the legend, account 3. The old master found enlightenment not in the center of the court, but by retreating into the unsettled frontier, recording his wisdom for Yingxi, the gate century, and then disappearing forever.
He wrote his definitive philosophy literally at the edge of civilization, just before he chose to vanish from it.
It raises a profound question for us today, in a modern world drowning in information, connectivity, and constant noise. What essential knowledge, what spiritual clarity might we gain if we, too, sought a Western jade, a deliberate internal or physical retreat, to escape the striving, the desires, and the artificial constraints of our hyper-connected world?
The search for wisdom, Laozi suggests, begins with the courageous choice to disappear.